Evening and welcome to Murfreesboro City Board of Education special call meeting, our policy work session. And tonight and future nights we'll be meeting at the council chamber. So we're inviting all of our public and all of our fans to come out and be with us some nights. I know we've got a fan base out there, so all of our fans come out and enjoy it with us. We're going to start off tonight. Good evening, Dr. Gilbert.
Good evening.
Ms. Baker. And to everyone in our audience. I wish they would, kind of scan it sometimes. But this is the same as our meeting we have at the central office. All questions we're going to discuss. If you have anything you need to ask Ms. Baker, we'll go from there. And the first thing on our agenda is we're going to item number 5, which is approval of United Way contract for Franklin Heights tutoring program. We need to delete that. That's already been taken care of, and if there are any further explanation, we'll get that for you, but this is something that does not come before the board, and we'll need to remove that tonight. The next is approval of the dismissal hearing officer list. Are there any questions about that or any explanation, Mrs. Renier?
I have a question. I guess Ms. Baker can answer it. There was a list of, 22 or 23 names. Would this be a random?
It is this is a list of hearing officers that the Tennessee School Board Association has recommended if you're doing any sort of discipline proceedings regarding tenured employees. And the board needs to approve the list, and then if there's a need to have a hearing, the director would pick someone from this list. Due to the nature of the hearings, you have to call the hearing officer, make sure they don't have a conflict with the school system or the employee that's the subject of the hearing, and find out if they're available for the dates that are needed, because statutorily there are strict timelines within which you have to have hearings.
Right.
So under the statute, the director picks someone off the list that's been approved by the board.
So it's just one person at a time, then? It's not a
Yes.
committee? Okay.
No, it's
'Cause
just one
my
individual.
concern was there's a name on the list of someone here in town that I thought needed to be removed.
Exactly, and we can remove Mr. Gilly, I would, because he's obviously conflicted out.
Right.
So we'll delete Mr. Gilly from the
Okay.
list, and I agree, he's obviously conflicted out.
Okay. Thank you.
Any-
Mr. Barrett?
That was my question.
Okay.
It's answered.
Thank you, Mrs. Baker, for your explanation of that. Are there any other questions concerning this list before we ask for a motion for the approval? We'll entertain a motion for the approval of the dismissal hearing officers list.
Make a motion, we approve the list.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Are there any that oppose, the sign of no? Thank you. Approval of school debt for the year 14 budget. Mr. Anderson?
Yes, this is a document that the city government always includes in their budget document for the entire city. It is the school debt service fund, and if you'll notice, it shows revenues coming in and expenditures going out is exactly the same number. It's no money that we touch or transfers to it. It's just recognizing the debt that it is for schools. And it's something that they have to do for their approval process. So what they've asked us to do is to have the board just vote to approve that this is money that's flowing through the accounts and will be paid for by the city governments. We don't do anything with it. Just part of the overall accounting process.
Ms. Phillips?
This is a new document that's come before the board, is it not, Mr. Anderson?
They do it every year, but this is the second year. I think they've actually had it in the first year you've seen it like this. Yes,
yeah.
ma'am.
First time we've seen it like this, I thought so.
Mrs. Smith?
So debt, it's not really debt, or explain it a little further.
Well, it's their debt service fund. They have, if you'll see the revenues, what they do is the accounting, the way the state established the accounting now is they want to show that money that a city or county government has actually where it's going. This money is being allocated through the school systems and what we're utilizing it. But if you'll notice, revenues transfer in is the same exact number as revenue or expenditures going out. So it doesn't mean anything to our budget at all. It's just for their accounting purposes.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Anderson? Mrs. Renier?
I'm sorry. So if that is in fact what it says on this paper, then what is the line at the bottom? What then are we transferring? If we've received this amount of money and then that amount has been spent, how come we're transferring something to the city debt service? Where does that come from?
When we are, right now, we are paying some of the bills for like the elevator that's being done.
Right.
They will reimburse us for that money. So it gets transferred to their debt service fund for them to pay out that money. They will pay us back. It's just, that's just showing, as you notice, what was estimated versus what was paid was totally different. It's an estimation of where it'll be. The top section is what is part of the debt service fund. The bottom one is just the transfers of that money back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions before we ask for approval of the school debt?
I do.
Mr. Campbell?
I'm sorry, but I'm confused.
Okay.
Again, okay, tell me one more time the purpose of this.
The city council has to approve their total budget, which includes the operating of the entire city. One of the accounting things that was changed under the state in the recent years is that they show which departments that the city is paying debt for. So, for example, they're paying this debt for us every year. You see it changes every year a little bit. So they have to show that they're paying it for us. So what they say is it's money that it's coming from them, but they send it to us just to show on paper. It's really a housekeeping thing for them. It's not money that we're seeing. We don't see this money come to us or leave us. It's just for their purposes.
So what we're saying in 2011-12, they paid the $2.7 million, basically?
Yes, sir.
And
And you
then-
see it's principal and interest as to what it is. That's, they're paying off for the school construction from the
Okay,
past, et cetera.
okay.
That's what it covers.
Okay, now I got you. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
If there are no other questions, we'll entertain a motion for the approval.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Are there any that oppose? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Dr. Gilbert?
Okay. The board had approved for Mitchell Nelson to have an art teacher both at Mitchell Nelson Elementary and Mitchell Nelson Primary. In talking with Ms. Newell, she is requesting that we use those funds, instead of an extra art teacher, that we use those funds for an extra resource teacher. This would require moving the art teacher out of the salary line 71,100 to the 71,200. I'm recommending approval of this. Within each school, you're going to have variances somewhat with what those schools need. When Ms. Newell looked at her schedule for next year, there was no way that she really could use the additional art teacher as far as fitting it into the schedule. Her art at her school, she would have as much art as any other school would have, but with what we're facing with RTI, there simply is not enough time for another 45 minutes of a special area there. So she is requesting, and I agree with her. I think given the needs of that particular school, it makes sense to approve this request, and so that is what the request is.
Any questions, board?
I have some questions.
Ms. Phillips and then Ms. Smith.
My first question is, help me understand a little bit about, does each child get art once a week?
Yes, within that school, you would have as much art there as you would have with any other school.
So each child does get art once a week?
Yes.
And does the art teacher does she have art rooms in both campuses, or how's that work?
Yes.
Okay, so she doesn't have to travel with a cart and do stuff like that. That's good. That's good. Now, I'm just wondering if there was some difference between budget time and now that would, I know Ms. Newell knows very well her needs better than anyone else at her school would know, but I'm just curious if there's something that's different.
I think what you're seeing here is you're seeing a request that with her resource and there probably will be evidence of need of that once the scores come in and are unembargoed, I think that it makes sense to go ahead. Special ed is an area where we have some challenges as far as meeting the scores. Ms. Newell also uses her resource teacher in some ways a little different, but really not. She uses the resource teacher in intervention more than some of the schools do, which makes sense if you're looking at preventing students from going into special ed. That's particularly true at the primary school, and I think that's one reason that you're seeing a need for that. She had, last year, she had enough resource teachers to handle the load. The year before, she was able to use the resource teacher in a similar way that she wants to use this year, and I think she feels that that would help her academically. So I think it's a matter of looking at her needs of her school and making that request.
My last question is then talking about RTI. We're talking about minutes spent on different subjects. Is that correct?
We're talking primarily about math and reading.
Math and reading.
And the way that it is structured, the state is requiring us to move to a specific number of minutes. And when you figure that out in the school day, there's just not room. There's room to breathe, but that's about it.
With that, and that's what I thought when I was reading the explanation that you were very gracious
Right.
to send. But I have to say, being me,
Okay.
there's time for breakfast in the classroom, but, there's no time for other things. So I have to say that's a big hunk of time, too. That's going to be 15 minutes at least. Or kids are going to have to be really multitasking while they eat. So, I just have to, I understand the concerns, and I applaud a novel approach to using resource teachers to try to prevent children from having to go into special ed. Anything we can do to help the kids, I support. But I do just want to point that out.
Thank you.
Something for you to think about.
Ms. Smith and then Mr. Campbell.
I had a nice conversation with Ms. Newell this afternoon, and we talked about the resource teacher and how she would need to use that. And, of course, I became very concerned because the resource teacher would be working with 14 or so children, one person anyway. Why did we, in years past, they had had more than one? Why did we lose a resource teacher last year in the first place?
The numbers were not, when you're looking at resource, you're looking at hours served. You're not necessarily looking at the number of students. And so you would find that the students, and I may need to get Karen Hawkins to help me here, but when you're looking at resource, you're not looking at a class of students that stays there for the full day. You're looking at students that are going to come and go during the day, depending upon what the needs are for those children, and that's really based on the IEP meeting. So you have service hours that a child, for example, a child may need an hour, a child may need 30 minutes, a child may need 2 hours, and so depending upon what that load looks like is really what you're looking at there. With Ms. Newell, as I said, she really was able to use the resource teacher not as a resource teacher normally is used, but in addition to what the role was there as a resource teacher, which would be dealing with special ed children, she also used it in their swarm group. So really she had a resource teacher interventionist. This last year, the resource teacher had to be a resource teacher, so she didn't have the luxury of having that.
I just, with her school in particular and several other schools, I would think that a resource teacher, I would hate to ever drop resource teachers. That seems
well,
very
I think
inadequate.
hopefully you'll see if you look at what RTI is supposed to be doing. The idea of RTI is to prevent children from going into special education, and technically, if that works, then you should see a decrease in the number of resource children that you're going to have in the district, and hopefully this will, at one time, we'll see this with resource too. But what we have seen with the interventionists is we've seen last year we had a much larger number of students who were going to be attending summer school than what we have this year. I think we only have 7 students, thank you, 7 students this year that really are not ELL or special ed that are below basic. And so that's quite a bit of progress right there from what we had last year. The idea with RTI is to do the same thing with resource. We're not there yet, but hopefully with the response to intervention and the amount of time that we'll be spending with reading in particular and the different tiers of reading, we're hopeful that those numbers do decrease. But we want to make sure that you're right. We want to make sure if we have children that are needing special education, those numbers need to be low enough for those children to really benefit from it. That's a challenge, particularly this year it's a challenge with IDEA, the cuts that we expect there. The interesting part about special ed is you get a certain amount of money for IDEA, but it doesn't cover nearly the amount of students that you're going to have. And so that's why in your budget you have a section that's really regular education, but it's special education. So it's the match that we put in, that a lot of it is a match that we put in to match IDEA is what it amounts to, because we just don't get enough money with IDEA. That's more information than you ever wanted to know. I know. I'm sorry.
But I'm so good with all those acronyms.
But the point is, it's a real balance, and depending upon the needs of the children, you may have more resource and you do have more resource teachers at some schools than you do have other schools. Just like in some schools, you're going to have one-on-one EAs for specific children. So each school is kind of unique with their needs and what they need for children with special needs and others.
Well, I just know that I would not, as a student, work well with 13 other kids who have all different issues. Yeah. So my understanding also, Ms. Phillips, is that it is actually not every week, it's every 6 days. That's my understanding. And now Ms. Newell can say that that's, but I do understand that absolutely I am way for empowerment of the principals. So whatever that she would like to change, I would go for that. But I don't want to be in a habit of changing from, I don't want to lose art.
No.
I think art's very important for our students to have that opportunity.
I agree. And if it's in some schools, you're going to have your rotation. Some schools will have, I don't think many have now, library. You may see technology. I think we'll see that moving out. But really the rotation that's set, I leave pretty much to the principals. They've got to have art. They've got to have music. They've got to have PE.
What do you mean by moving out on technology?
Pardon? We're looking at if we get a technology plan approved, it would move the technology into the classroom, so the labs would, as far as instruction in the lab, you would have instruction in the classroom.
Mr. Campbell and then Ms. Phillips.
My memory hits me right. Last year, midway through the year maybe, we moved an art teacher from Discovery School to Mitchell Nelson in a part-time position. No? Robin says no?
No. At the beginning of the year, what we did is we looked at classes, the number of classes, and Mr. Anderson, you may want to explain this because you did that. So would you explain how you got the
We
numbers?
base it not on enrollment, but on number of classrooms, so like how many teachers. And what one art teacher can do is a little over 7 class periods a day, could actually run up to 8 if they do between 40 and 45 minutes. So if there's 7 class periods per day and a school has just say 21 classrooms in it, that teacher can cover all the classes one time per week in 3 days. And that's how these numbers are calculated. It's figured out the most effective and efficient way that they can get 1 period of art per day. Same thing is in PE where it's 2 times, so we would double that number. But that's how it's calculated.
Why did we lose part of an art teacher at Discovery last year? Didn't we?
We did, but when we put our
When you
budget
look at
in, we put a full-time.
I understand that. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, what's the difference today than what it was last year when we lost the art teacher at Discovery School to go to Mitchell Nelson? And I don't know whether it's elementary or primary.
No, when you look at the number of classes, and it was Hopgood, when you look at the number of the classes at Discovery, you do not have to have, according to those classes, a full-time teacher there.
Okay.
And that's the same situation you have at Mitchell Nelson. It's really taken, it's looking at the number of the classrooms and how many classes they can teach a day and whether that can be taught if you can have one art class a week for each classroom.
Okay. So everybody's still getting art at least once a week?
They have the numbers to get art once a week.
Okay.
But it's really not once a week. It's once every 6 days. For Mitchell Nelson.
For some of the schools, perhaps.
Well, I thought they said
I
they rotated
think when you look at the
every 3 days.
calculation, it should be there. Now, whether they're using it for that or whether they have other rotations, that's up to the principal.
As long as they're meeting the minimum standards, that's what we expect.
I'm very conflicted because, on the one hand, I agree wholeheartedly that our principals, Ms. Newell included, know what they need at their schools. They know what they need. They know what works. They know their school community. On the other hand, I just want to throw this out, just something to stick, file away somewhere and kind of think about from time to time. And that is, I want to be very careful that we don't inadvertently, absolutely inadvertently, sidestep the overall vision of the board for the school system. I think that, and I don't think that's what's been done, but I just think we have to be very careful to guard the vision. And in fact, we would be better at guarding the vision if we actually had a vision. And that's why I think it's important that we don't let our agenda become full as it's rapidly becoming for the retreat. If you go to the school board TSBA meetings, they are very, very clear on one of the most important responsibilities, and I agree wholeheartedly with this, of the board, is setting the vision for the school system, because everything trickles down from that. That vision sets the standards and the expectations and, the dream and concrete. It gives hands and feet and thoughts to what we hope as a corporate unit that our school system can be. So I just want to throw that out, and I think it's important to, while we empower our principals, that we never ever sidestep the overall vision of the board.
Okay.
So, Mr. Barrett,
I'm gonna be in favor of this, but Miss Newell knows her school. I'm in favor of moving this teacher over, the resource. She knows the students, so just wanted to throw my 2 cents in, but.
now they're not throwing the art teacher over there. This is a new position, or we have somebody already that we're going to put in that spot. Is that what we're saying?
The art teacher at Mitchell Nelson Primary and Mitchell Nelson Elementary, which would basically do the same thing they did last year. Is that right?
Well, if I seem confused, let me apologize first. Maybe I've miscued somewhere. I thought in the budget we were adding.
That's
No,
what
we're not.
the board, when the board wanted one art teacher at every school,
Okay.
which put a teacher at Mitchell Nelson Elementary and Mitchell Nelson Primary.
Okay.
When Ms. Newell looked at the budget and saw she was getting an art teacher at the elementary and at the primary
Okay.
school, then she requested that she return, as she had last year, to one teacher between the 2 schools so that she could pick up a resource teacher.
I'm on page right now. Ms. Renier.
So when we went through all the staffing standards and we talked about the number, the projected enrollment, and how many teachers of each discipline, let's say, that generated, I've gone through the budget and I don't see one for resource. Is that generated? Is there a state standard that we have to follow, or is it? I always thought it was the number of students that you had determined.
It's the number of hours. And what Ms. Newell is saying is she would like to reduce that and be able to get a resource teacher that could basically also serve as an interventionist. Right now in your budget, you should have, as far as the special area teachers, you should have, and correct me if this is not right, You should have enough in there for 2 days of art, 2 days of music, 2 days of music, 2 days of art, and 2 days of music, 2 days of PE, and a day of art. Is that right? Okay.
But then the principals themselves set their own rotation, per
That's
se,
right.
because some of them do include
That's right.
media, library,
That's right.
and/or guidance.
By law, you
kind
have
of
to
thing.
have the 90 minutes of PE. That's,
Right.
That's what's required.
But that's the only one that's required? Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Phillips.
I just want to throw in, so speaking of staffing standards reminded me of that, and that is, my only other concern, and I did check with Ms. Baker about this, was the possibility, I have a little concern that it may perhaps it's setting a precedent of school community saying, well, we don't really need that. Let's do this instead with our staffing dollars or with our staff. And I wanted to make sure that didn't happen. That didn't set a precedent for that. And after discussing that with Ms. Baker, she said that she could see that if it were a broader application, if I'm understanding what you told me, Ms. Baker, but on a single case like that, it would not be. But, on a broader sense, it could have been. So, since it's not that, I think, great, let's that. Go ahead.
If there are no other questions, I'll ask for a motion for the approval of staffing adjustment.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Ms. Baker?
Okay. The first policy that you have before you tonight that was passed on first reading is Board Policy STU 59, Special Education and Behavioral Support. Does the board have any additional questions on this policy? As I've indicated in past discussions, this policy is strictly based on a state statute that is called the Special Education Behavioral Supports Act. And one question that had been raised before relative to the definitions, you had wanted some more clarification. And I will revise, make sure the definitions in our policy are verbatim what's in the state statute. I did notice that one of the ones, the isolation or seclusion definition, had apparently been tweaked somewhat from what's in the state statute, so I'll be sure that that is revised to reflect the exact language in the state statute.
If there are no questions for Ms. Baker,
Wait.
Mr. Campbell?
Kelly, look on line 6, please. I think we have a repetition. Line 5, if the situation warrants physical intervention, physically restraining a student may be necessary. Well, I don't guess so. Maybe the difference between restraint and holding. Then it says physical holding restraint of a student may be necessary. You see where I am?
Yes, I see that. I'll check that and make a correction if needed before the next meeting.
Ms. Baker, we'll need a motion to bring this to our board meeting on the 25th. All righty. We'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Thank you.
Okay, the next policy you have before you is Board Policy STU 62 regarding safe relocation of students. And again, as we've discussed in the prior meeting, this has been approved on first reading. It is also based on a state statute, TCA 49-6, 4018. Are there any questions, additional questions regarding this policy?
Mrs. Renier, do you have a question for the prior?
Well, I'm sorry, I just noticed as I scrolled down that I had a note that it's just a typo kind of thing on line 263 of that policy. I think it's 263.
Are you talking about the prior policy?
Yes, the prior one, STU 59, if suicidal or homicidal ideations are verbalized, there should be a comma. A mobile crisis unit will, blah, blah, blah.
What line was that?
263. Sorry. I just-
263?
263 on STU 59.
In the, okay, got it. Okay.
After the first clause. Sorry about that. You know me, I'm going to find those silly little things.
If there are no questions or changes for Ms. Baker on STU 62, we'll entertain a motion for the approval to bring it forward to the next board meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, the next policy that you have before you that has been passed on first reading is Board Policy STU 61. It's regarding anti-hazing. This is another one that is tied to a state statute and required by state statute to be adopted by the board. The statute is TCA 49-2-120. I had some questions at the last meeting regarding this policy and the fact that the state law does require the board to react if there has been hazing off school property. And my research has shown that the only time the school system would be required to react to that hazing is if it meets the definition, which would mean that it had to be an intentional or reckless act by one student or acting alone or with others that is directed at another student, meaning another student that goes to that school. And the training that the State Department has put out regarding hazing indicates that you will look to see if that conduct resulted because they were in the same organization. For example, they're both in band, and the hazing was a result of the fact that they were in the same organization. That's the training that the states put out. That's what they seem to focus on.
Mrs. Smith has a question.
So the organization could be an extracurricular, not the school itself.
Well, it's if they're in a certain type of club or organization associated with the school. Say they're both in band, or they're both on the basketball team or the cheerleading squad. I'm trying to think of organizations we have.
But that doesn't,
within the school.
that's not how this reads to me.
Well, that's how the state law is written, and I was following what the state law said. And then when I looked back at the training that the State Department of Education has put out regarding hazing, that's how they define it in their training. They focus on if the children were involved in the same organization.
That makes a lot more sense than the way that this reads to me, because this reads to me as if it's any kind of hazing situation where there had one student in the school with against another student in the school at any time in their existence.
And I think the way the training distinguishes hazing from bullying is hazing is associated with being part of the same club, the same, athletic group or extracurricular group, whether it's a science. I think we've got some science clubs or groups at different schools. Versus bullying would be more what you're thinking about. One child in the school bullies another child in the school, and that's their only relation is they go to the same school. So that's the difference between hazing versus bullying, so to say. And I think it's one reason we didn't have this policy on our books before, because we don't have a lot of these type of groups, whereas the middle and high school does and would run into this issue more frequent than an elementary school system.
That makes sense.
Any other questions for Ms. Baker concerning this policy? Hearing none, we entertain a motion. Was that a motion, Ms. Renier? Thank you.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next policy that's on your agenda, you don't have a policy before you. There's a law that deals with the privacy of educational records. It's referred to as FERPA, Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And with that law, there are certain notifications that must be made to students and parents every year. And the feds have tweaked that notice somewhat, so it will cause us to need to revise our policies to reflect the changes they've made in those notice requirements. They're very, very minor changes, but there are some minor changes we'll need to make to those policies. It's not really any substantive change. It's just making sure that we're using the exact language recommended by the United States Department of Education when it comes to FERPA.
Is that
Any questions?
STU 14?
No, I didn't bring that to you tonight.
All righty.
I just wanted to discuss that with you and see if you had any questions.
Okay. All right. Are there any questions from Ms. Baker concerning the one that we're going to have tweaked before we, okay. All righty. The board self-assessment. The only thing we'll say, although I had Mrs. Ridley to go ahead and forward the copies of this to all the board members for you to look at it, we will have this at our board retreat. TSBA will be there with us to go over it. They'll tell us how they compiled the scores that you see on your paper. So that's the reason why it's on here, just as a reminder and for you to look over it. So we'll be prepared to discuss it at our August retreat. On the subject of that, it's just a reminder to please keep your schedules open and available for August the 17th. And I'm working diligently with Dr. Gilbert and Mrs. Ridley to get that done. It came up during the meeting a few minutes ago that the agenda is getting full. When you think about the agenda, the assessment's going to take a little bit of time. Vision, a whole lot of time. So I don't know what else, but if you have anything else you want to submit, please forward that to Mrs. Ridley so she can get it to Dr. Gilbert for the retreat. The retreat will be all day.
Where will it be?
We're working on that.
Have we thought about the overnight thing like we used to do, where we did a lot of work Friday night and then we did Saturday all day?
We have thought about it.
I mean, that we got a lot done,
And we can still have the Friday night and Saturday retreat, but what we're trying to do is maybe keep it local and maybe use accommodations here in the city and start it on Friday night and possibly at 5 and maybe conclude at about 8, and then we'll go home and start back up at 8 o'clock the next morning. I think it will be of a necessity for us to consider that Friday night. So go ahead and put on your calendar. Ms. Ritter will be sending reminders out and asking you, probably in July, if Friday night the 16th at 5, and you may want to go ahead and put that down and look at it at 5 o'clock. You will be getting where we'll have it and a little more information about that. So I agree with Mrs. Phillips. We want to have a good retreat, but we're going to have to start it on Friday night to get it concluded. The vision will take some time. But be thinking about your vision. Don't wait till that day. And be thinking about it in advance and maybe write down. August? Yes, ma'am. But we're going to try to keep it close so it won't be a hardship on anybody trying to get there and come back. Also, I need to make the board aware that, and the public, we have selected a board for the naming of the school. We're still pending some acceptance. Dr. Gilbert and I have sent out an email to them, getting them to reply back. If the board would like to submit, or the public, if you'd like to submit a name if you would, call the central office at 615-893-2313 and ask or leave a message for Ms. Trail to return your call to you. These would be submitted to her to refer over to Dr. Gilbert. So once the committee, the board is formed and meeting, then we'll get a chance to discuss that. The board will be made aware of the ones that have been chosen once everything is in place and everybody has accepted to work with it. So we will, you'll probably know next week. All righty, we're just moving right along. We're now, unless it's something else, we're down now to the draft agenda of our meeting for,
I just wanted to know how the quick scores compared.
I can't tell you that.
Oh, well, then
Right
I
now,
still
I'm
want to know
sorry.
it, but that's
I think they are embargoed until, I believe, it's either the 15th of June or the 24th of June, and I can't
They have
remember.
them embargoed, all the students have their quick scores?
They're embargoed from the public, yes.
And tell us, if you can, a little bit about the process on the re-release of the report cards.
Okay. I'm going to actually let Karen Hawkins, if you would please address that about the report cards and what happened with that. It really has to do with state law as much as anything else as far as, because, and I'm not even going to try to explain that even.
What we realized after the report cards were released is that the grades are averaged in different ways. Each 9 weeks, the students' grades are averaged based on a total point score. So as in 9 weeks, if they had opportunities for 800 points and a student had 700 of those points, then you get the percentage for that, but it's considered on a total points. By state law and your policy, we have to include TCAP in the final grade, and that's the term grade or the final grade. And so those grades are averaged based on, the TCAP is actually a portion of the second semester grade. So if you look at each quarter, the first 9 weeks, the grade percentage would be 25% of the total grade. The second 9 weeks would be 25%. The third 9 weeks would be 17.5. The fourth 9 weeks would be 17.5, and then the TCAP would be 15%, and that would give you 100% across the grade. When the grades were pulled from Skyward, it pulled that total point grade rather than the percentage grades that were in the grade book for TCAP. So what we had to do is we had to work with Skyward and figure out a way to pull not a letter grade, because that was what was in there, but pull a numeric grade, because we felt like if parents received this grade and it was a letter grade and they couldn't go back and put the calculator to it, as some parents did, that wouldn't be it wouldn't be giving them enough information for the parents. We wanted to have full disclosure in those grades. So what we did is we went back, I worked with Skyward, we figured out a way to get that grade out of there and onto the report card, and then we reprinted all the report cards for the district and mailed those with a letter letting the parents know that there had been an error in the initial calculation. Then we also sent folks back out to the buildings from central office. We went through the cumulative records. We pulled out the old report cards. We put in a current report card that is the accurate, because that's our responsibility, is to report accurate grades for our students. So we tried to take that burden off of the buildings. Really and truly, it was a little bit of a surprise that it wasn't noticed at the teacher level, or, before they went out. But it wasn't, and there are really subtle differences. So it did impact some grades. I regret that first grade wasn't accurate, but we did everything we could to make sure that what we did release in the end was accurate and a true reflection of what the intention of that state law is. So that's how it was handled.
So was it, in the end, was it a Skyward error, or was it a city schools error, or just a combination of the two?
It was really a combination of both. The grade was in there. it just wasn't pulling it the right field accurately. The only way we could get that term grade out based on what we knew was as a letter grade. We had set our grade cards up to pull a numeric grade throughout the year. And we really didn't notice that it wasn't pulling from the right field until the very end when it calculated that full term, because each 9 weeks the grades were actually correct. It was at the end when it had to go across the grades and average it that we realized that particular field was incorrect. So, I'll take responsibility for that. I mean, I feel like that, we sent it out, it wasn't correct. I built those templates. I felt really strong that I should make sure that it was corrected and that the parents were notified of the accurate grade.
Thank you. It was done promptly, and I appreciate that.
It was a fun week. But, I think that not many parents noticed it. We probably only had about 3 calls district-wide. So, and that's because I think it was a pretty subtle mistake. And to be honest, it's a little confusing the way those grades are averaged. But we knew that in the teachers' grade books, they were accurate. Because, we could open up a grade book and they were accurate, they were averaged correctly. It was just getting it out of that grade book on the right spot on the grade card. And I had some help, had a lot of help helping get it pulled off. Our tech coaches helped. Our office pretty much shut down and made sure that it happened. So, but what's out there now is the real deal.
Thank you.
Ms. Rainier?
Did you notice that it affected a lot of children, or was it just a small number?
It had some impact across the district. You could, when it was first brought to our attention, we would go in and we would go through an average, and some subjects it might not make a difference. Other subjects it might make a little bit of a difference. But it was, and that was originally that was kind of scary because we thought it might be random. We thought it might be really something going on. Mm-hmm. And then once we realized that the field was there and all those fields were accurate, then we were able to pull the grades. So, I don't know the percentage of students that one grade was accurate and the other was not. But you might find that maybe the reading and the math was correct, that when it averaged that weighted grade, it turned out that it matched the TCAP. But then if it didn't, then that's where it was. And let's say that a particular teacher had maybe 800 or 900 points the first 9 weeks, and the child made a low grade, and then there was only 85 points or 90 points for the TCAP, it really weighted that first 9 weeks way too heavy. And that's what it was doing. It was just adding up the total points across the year.
Did Skyward help with the cost of having to redo all of this?
No, I really feel like that it is our obligation to make sure that when we print the report cards that we're verifying that they're correct. So there wasn't, it was our postage and our time, but we didn't have to hire extra people to do it.
I have just a question as far as, and I know it was a necessity, but when your office personnel had to go to the schools and go in the permanent records, didn't they have to sign that they were going into the record and the reason for
Well, they
being
went
there?
to the building and talked with the principal and gained access to those files and then replaced them. So they were just filing those records, pulling out the old report card and putting a new report card in.
Okay.
So that was handled at the building level.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, have you had a chance to review the draft agenda for our June 25th meeting?
I'd like to add a couple things. I'd like a thorough review of recess at each of our locations, please, for the upcoming school year.
For this month?
No, for the upcoming school year.
No, but you want this for July?
Yeah.
I mean, June? Okay.
You want it for the
I'll
June
need to, okay. I'll try.
I mean, I'm not in a big hurry.
Okay.
What
I
works
just,
for the
I
staff?
don't know whether I can access the principals, how
The
well.
principals aren't working like
Yeah,
this.
okay, well, I mean, yeah, I mean, at your convenience, I would like a,
Okay,
just sometime, as soon as you can,
Okay.
that'll be fine. And then the second thing I'd like to add to the agenda is a little discussion about information for the board regarding new hires on the administrative level and or new positions.
okay.
You want this for the
That's the next meeting.
next meeting?
Yeah.
Under reports and information?
No, I would like a discussion of that for us. I'd like us to be able to discuss it.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about that?
Mr. Campbell?
The man in the blue shirt, I'm looking at him.
Mr.
hard now.
Ringstaff?
Do we have administrative positions that we have advertised or posted at the present time?
Assistant principal,
Where?
location to be determined. The district-wide.
How could that be? We already
One or
announced
more
who the
than
person
one.
was, that's, we haven't announced the.
No, well, what happens with that, though, is when you look at that, right now, the assumption would be it would be Discovery and Pittard. But with the APs, there may be some shifting there. I don't think there will be. I think it'll be hired for Discovery and Pittard. But if we get a person whose talents are used more at another school, then that would happen.
I see, but we know that there's a vacancy
Right.
at those schools.
Right.
So,
Dr. Gilbert?
Sure.
Would you explain the position that Mrs. Barch has accepted? I think she's accepted the what?
It's a position of gifted coordinator
Oh, okay. Okay,
So that leaves her spot at Discovery and Pitter.
and Pittard. Right.
so that would be the,
I don't know. That's interesting.
is that the last thing, is that what you want from Mr. Ringstaff for the next meeting?
Yeah, may I ask Ms. Baker a question? Regarding what Ms. Wade just said, and the discussion about Ms. Barch, can we discuss that now? Or would that be not on the agenda?
That's not on this agenda.
Okay.
It's not on this agenda. You would need to,
Okay.
I believe
That's-
y'all have asked to put it on another
Right,
agenda.
okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Wade.
Is it clear for you, Mr. Ringstaff?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Mrs. Smith?
I'm sure you're going to do this anyway, but I would love to have at least the numbers of the people that are retiring. And can you give us the numbers on the non-renewals and people that are, can you just give us a little more thorough report? I guess that needs to go on the next agenda, but if you could,
It's on the agenda for the end of the month.
Yeah, but- okay.
What I would like to do is have the title resignations, retirement / non-renewals. I don't want to.
that's fine.
Okay, I can do that.
You lump them all under one?
Yes, ma'am. I'd like
So
to do that.
we would know we just know they fall somewhere under
They're
one of
not
those
here
three
longer.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
That's not what Cogger's asking.
no.
I probably really would want to know. Can you not, you don't have to put the names. I would like to know how many people are retiring
Like
out of
the
our
number.
system versus the,
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, you don't have, I know you can't put the name. I guess you can put the
Yes, you
names of
can.
people
Yes.
retiring,
You can.
It's in the report, though.
already had a-
Yeah.
even the non-renewals.
Mm-hmm.
We had 3 non-renewals.
Don't you normally already put that in there? Am I dreaming?
We got it last year, we haven't gotten it this year, other than that
You will-
last
you will have
personnel
a
report.
June report. We don't have
Every
a
month we
report
get it.
because school is still in session.
Okay.
We report.
All right, that would be under other business. So a little more, if a little more explanation is needed, since it's not on this agenda, after the meeting, if you all would just maybe clarify exactly what you want from Mr. Ringstaff, he'll have it on the,
If I could comment, I would hope that with that list, that it is listed as non-renewal or resignation rather than specifically identifying those individuals. If the board would like to know the individuals, then I'm sure Mr. Ringstaff could provide that with a phone call. I just am really hesitant about that.
And we've had it that way in the but we can't discuss it now. It's not on the agenda, so.
We can add it to the board agenda for discussion at our June 25th meeting, just to get clarification. During that time, if you have a question that you're a little uncertain about, and some things I know when it comes to personnel, it's not going to be on this report. So you can call Mr. Ringstaff or Dr. Gilbert for a little better clarification. And on the next agenda, then maybe an explanation will be given why last year was there, and this year maybe it was something you opted not to, maybe an explanation for why you opted not to put it on there. I don't, anyway. But you know what I'm saying? I'm hearing the board members say, we've got this. Last year we got it all the time, and now we're not getting it. So maybe you can explain to them the next meeting why, or if they call you, you let us know why you're not getting it now.
But you will have it at the
Okay.
June
25th?
25th meeting.
Okay. Well, I thought we'd been getting it, but maybe I misunderstood.
The law has changed so that we do not have to, actually, the lists are made now June 15th, right, Ralph?
Yes, ma'am.
So that's the reason that you'll be getting in the June meeting.
Okay. Thank you. If there are no other questions or any other business that you'd like to add to the, okay.
No, just an announcement, but I'll let you finish.
Oh, no, go right ahead.
About the groundbreaking next Tuesday.
Oh.
I was going to say something. Since we're actually on TV now, we can actually make announcements. But it's next Tuesday at 4 o'clock, or not next Tuesday, June 25th, 4 o'clock, groundbreaking at the new school site before our next school board meeting. So I just want to throw that out there to the public. You're more than welcome.
Where's the meeting going to be?
What, here?
On the site over there,
The new school
on the
site.
grounds.
That is our board meeting night, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
But it's at a different, we'll still have time to get over and get
Yeah.
back.
Hopefully.
We're going to take the shuttle,
Take the show.
Okay.
the van.
Well, if there's nothing else and no more announcements, Dr. Gilbert, do you have anything that
I'm
you
good.
wanted to?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
If nothing else, we'll entertain a, let's see, 6:58, that's close. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, sign of aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
We can stick around.
That was what it said.